There's just so much.
You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters this podcast was recorded on.
It's July 2014 in Gympie in southeast Queensland, and Alison Russell receives a phone call. It's about her daughter. Her boyfriend has told the paramedics she had an overdose of antidepressants, but after being rushed to the local hospital, Kirra-Lea McLoughlin's injuries are so severe she's being flown to the Gold Coast. She doesn't survive. The 27-year-old dies the following day. A total of 105 bruises are found on her body. The mother of four's official cause of death is from a catastrophic brain injury. Police have been called to Kirra-Lea's Beenham Valley Road home before. The young mum had previously called 000 herself, telling them her partner had attacked her. When they arrived, however, she told them she'd made a mistake. A few months later, she was dead. And that's where the story ended, for about 8 years. Because there were no arrests, no charges, no further investigations. Until 2 Gympie police officers took matters into their own hands.
You look at other suspicious deaths and there's plenty of coverage about them, but this just seemed to go by the wayside and she was forgotten. This case has been haunting me because I feel for the victim, I feel for her family. So when I left the police, I thought, now I could do something about it because I'm not a police officer anymore.
I'm Gemma, and this is True Crime Conversations, a Mamamia podcast exploring the world's most notorious crimes by speaking to the people who know the most about them. This Domestic and Family Violence Prevention Month, we're digging into our archives to revisit crimes that should have changed everything. In this case, 2 former cops found they were able to do more good for this victim and her family by using a podcast instead of their position within the police force to push for action. Let that sink in for a minute. In 2019, former Gympie police officers Jamie Pultz and Tom Daunt started releasing episodes of their Beenham Valley Road investigation. It had been the case Jamie couldn't let go of. He'd been called to Kirra-Lea's house while still on the beat, and he'd learned about her death while sitting in Gympie police station. When he read her autopsy report, he noticed there was no mention of any domestic violence relationship. But he knew her former partner had multiple convictions for DV. He knew he'd previously gone to prison. He knew Kirra-Lea had been alone with him the night she was injured. He knew the toxicology report had suggested Kirra-Lea hadn't overdosed like the boyfriend had suggested. When Jamie spoke to True Crime Conversations in April 2020, no one had been charged over Kirra's death. A coronial inquest had been announced, but not formalised. In 2024, all of that has changed. But first, it's worth listening to where the case stood only a few short years ago. Here's Jessie and Jamie.
So you actually met Kirra McLoughlin. What was that encounter like?
Yeah, so Jesse, that was about 2013. I was a first-year constable of police in Gympie. And, the call when I went there wasn't actually for anything police-related to do with her anyway. It's hard to explain what I was there for, but it was for something else. It was actually a case that was there. It was called the Torso case, and a torso had rocked up and had been burnt in a nearby area, and no one knew who it was. And obviously, as a result, the police were going to every house and just checking that everybody was living there that was still alive and making sure they weren't the torso. And so as a result, I went to Kirra's house and I knocked on the door, and that's when I first met her. So that interaction was just a normal interaction. It was just a everyday job. And when I met her, she had 4 little kids. She was 27. She was nice. I could relate to her in that way. But it was the second call for a domestic violence incident, which I can't go into too much details for legal reasons, but that was the one that really stuck with me because 6 months later or so, she was dead. And I guess that sort of plays in your mind that did you do everything right, or what could we have done, or I guess, your brain plays tricks on you.
And Did you meet her alongside her partner at the time?
I met her the first time I was there. That was not to do with them. He was there. And, it was like 8 o'clock in the morning, I'm pretty sure, and he had a beer and it was a bit rough and just gave me that impression. I don't really need to say any more. You kind of know what I'm talking about. But that kind of a guy, been in trouble before and had a pretty big rap sheet. I didn't really speak to him too much though, but my partner at the time when I was doing the podcast with Tom, he had actually interviewed him for a few offences and knew him and was at the crime scene, and he was involved in that way. But I didn't actually have to do anything with him apart from meeting him once.
And the next time you heard Kirra's name was in quite different circumstances. What had happened to Kirra when you heard that again?
Well, I was in the police station. I remember it very clearly, and someone popped up. I wasn't working it that day, and I remember coming back into work and someone had said, "Oh, Kirra McLoughlin died." And, they discussed a little bit about it, how it was sus and she'd been beaten. And I remember just sinking into the chair and just my heart dropped because it was the first time. I mean, I'd been to a few dead bodies already. My second shift was a dead body and you come across them quite a lot, and domestic violences. But this is the first time that I had attended a job for domestic violence and this person had quite likely died as a result of domestic violence. That hasn't been proven, but that's where I'm thinking it went. And it really hit me because I thought, well, this is very serious, like what we deal with, the conversations we have with people as we're attending these jobs, the consequences are massive. They're life-changing, they're life-threatening. It's hard to put into words, really.
And what was the cause of Kirra's death?
Catastrophic head injuries was the cause of her death. Basically, she was beaten to death. The pathologist doing the autopsy noted 105 bruises on Kirra's body. So that's a fair bit of damage. And the ultimate cause of death was head injuries, and Alison, the mother, had to make the heart-wrenching decision to shut the life support off because there was actually, her words were, there was no brain activity left. The incident happened the day before. They were alone that night. Somewhere during that night, something's happened and she's been unconscious. And he waited like 12 hours to call ambulance. And by the time they got there, she was in a pretty bad way. They took her to Gympie, but they couldn't deal with what she had. So they flew her via helicopter to the Gold Coast University Hospital, where she died the next day.
So going back to the day before, Kirra had people over to the house, didn't she?
Yeah, this was a matter of contention during the podcast. So to go back a little bit, when I was in the police, I remember hearing that there was some story of the sister of the guy I'm calling Jason, Kirra's partner, which is not his real name. There was a conversation about her having a fight with Kirra at that house, Beenham Valley Road. And we didn't really know. Going into this podcast, we had no idea. That was all we really knew because I couldn't go back and look in the police data systems anymore, not being a cop. So what we did was we went to Alison and we asked her what she knew had happened. And she thought there was a gathering there of a few people. And throughout the podcast, we learnt that it was Jason's sister Tamika, who came on the podcast, Jason's nephew and Tamika's nephew, Tamika's 2-year-old, and at some point her mum was there. Jason and Tamika's mum was there in the afternoon for a little bit, and Kirra. And they were having drinks and they were playing music. But the part where this gets murky is that the neighbours don't agree with that. They didn't see people, they didn't hear music. They can hear and see things because noise does travel in those sort of rural places, but that's what the narrative we were given. And at some point though, around about 9 o'clock, they all left, including Jason, because Tamika, by her own admissions, had a fight with Kirra. And it was about something silly. They were drinking and it got out of hand and they were throwing tyre chains and throwing cans of paint and it was pretty nasty. And Tamika says that she hit her about 4 times in total, at one point knocking her out. So Tamika does think, and she said on the record that she thinks that she might have had something to do with her death, even though it's probably not likely. But that's what she told us happened. And they all left the house. The mum picked them all up, leaving Kirra alone. But at some point, when everyone had left the house, Jason said, I need to go back. Kirra's called to say that she's going to take all her pills, kill herself basically. So the brother, Nakota, drove Jason back to the house. And I spoke to Nakota and he said that happened. He saw him walk up. He saw Kirra there though, so she was alive at that point. After that, the other neighbour heard an argument and heard someone on the phone, Jason, saying, I effed up. I don't know what to do. And then they heard a car arrive. It was silent after that. The next morning, both neighbours on both sides saw a white car at around about 8 o'clock in the morning at Kirra's house, with a man and a woman getting out of the car and walking to the house.
You're listening to True Crime Conversations. Up next, we delve into Kirra-Lea's partner's history of domestic violence and what Jamie was able to find out about his past relationships.
The day before when that fight broke out, and allegedly there were people over, and Jason's sister, as you say, in her own words, had a physical fight with Kirra, does it look like there was alcohol or drugs involved at that time?
Yeah, so Jessie, who is Tamika's niece, I also spoke to, said that Kirra was drunk. That's what she said. She was drunk. She didn't drink very often, so she was quite intoxicated. Tamika had said in episode 3 or 4 that they had all decided to take a sugar pill, which people who have known Jason said that's absolute crap because he knows what a drug is and he's not going to fall for a sugar pill. So I'm kind of thinking that maybe they gave Kirra a sugar pill because there was no drugs found in her system as far as I'm aware from the toxicology report. But maybe they had the real drug and maybe Kirra had a sugar pill. But there was definitely alcohol involved. And I don't know about the others. They certainly have a rap sheet for drug use, so yeah.
And with Kirra, was it usual for her to be fighting with Jason's sister? Was there sort of some underlying tensions there with her, or why did this seem to kind of explode on that particular night?
Well, Tamika told me Kirra wasn't a fighter and Jason was actually trying to hold Tamika back because, you know, he was saying she's not a fighter. But Kirra was feisty and she didn't take anyone's shit. That's what Alison told me. She did not take anyone's crap and, you know, that would sometimes get her into trouble with certain people. She did have that, you know, feistiness about her and that sticking up for herself. And as far as any issues between the two, they'd only met a few times, but Tamika tells me when I first met her on the record that she didn't like Kirra. Straight up, didn't like her. I don't know why that is. So there definitely was some underlying tension there, I believe. That's why we called the episode My Brother's Keeper, because she says she doesn't, but at that point she was her brother's keeper. She would always bail him out. They had a system. She would pick him up when he was in trouble with the police. You know, he would run out to the bush somewhere and coo-ee, and she would know where to find him. Like, they had a system. It happened that often. They had a system.
And you say that Jason had quite the record. What did that record look like? And do we know much about the relationship he'd had with Kirra up until that point?
He had a record of domestic violence, and there was also drugs there and maybe a few other things. I'm not 100% certain of them, but definitely domestic violence charges. I know he'd been in prison for that. There was one time where he did go to jail for an offence of domestic violence for contravening a domestic violence protection order, and Kirra was the aggrieved in that order. So I know that happened definitely once, and I'm not sure exactly the circumstances around that. I can't access all the information. He definitely did have other history with other things. He is incarcerated at the moment for a number of other offences relating to another female that he met after Kirra. In relation to Kirra's relationship with him, it's quite murky and it's a turbulent relationship. So what happened was Jason was in a de facto relationship with another lady who I also interviewed, Katie. They had a domestic violence relationship. It was, listening to Katie's story was horrendous, what she went through with Jason. And they lived nearby. They lived in Wolvi, the same community as Kirra. And through that community and through Jason and Kirra working together at the turkey farm, they met. And Jason was quite, flirtatious and that sort of thing. And they started, hanging out. And basically Jason just took Kirra and basically stopped the relationship with Kirra's husband because she was married at the time. And Katie was left to sit at home at the shed with her kids while Jason was off with Kirra. But he kept the both of them. He would go to Kirra's house for the day or a few nights and then come back and make sure that Katie was still there and still doing what he told her to and all that sort of stuff and trapping her bare basically. And then she calls it her escape. She actually made an escape where she had finally swallowed her pride and contacted an old friend to come up, and they made a time and they drove her out of there. They packed their stuff up and left. Then it was just Kirra and Jason, and, Katie remembers calling Kirra and saying, "Has he hit you yet?" And she would say yes. And she's like, "Mate, you've got to get out of there. You've got to get out of there." But sometimes you just can't tell people when they're in this situation.
And Kirra, you say that she was in a relationship before. She had 4 kids. Were they to that previous partner?
Yeah, all 4 kids were with her husband. She was married young. It was like 18 or 19 off the top of my head. So she married young and she had 4 kids pretty quickly. Child 1 to 4 was very quick. I don't know if this is true or not, but Katie, her friend, would say that she was starting to maybe look for more attention. Maybe her husband wasn't giving her what she wanted. So she started to have a bit of a fling with the 17, 18-year-old neighbour, who I also interview. And so they had a fling, and maybe Jason could see her vulnerability, with that. And when he met her, he was giving her that attention that she might have needed. After talking to all these people, I believe that that's true. Maybe she did want some more attention and he gave her that. But then when she was in it, she realised she was in trouble and was trying to make those steps to get away. I think because the neighbours, Damo, on that fateful night, he heard her say, "I don't love you anymore," or words to that effect. So I think she had made that decision to go with him and then regretted it and paid the ultimate price for it, really.
And didn't the subject of this 17-year-old neighbour come up on her last night? There was some allusion to that from Tamika, I believe, when they were fighting. Is it possible that she was still in that relationship up until the end, or had it ended?
Well, when I speak to Sean, the 17-year-old, he flat out denies that. He says he wasn't there. It stopped when Jason had got out of jail because Kirra told him, "Look, I've got a new partner. He's in jail. He's pretty serious, so I think this should stop." So he assures me that it stopped. And I originally did think that he may have been there after Jason and everyone had left the house. Maybe Kirra had got him over there to comfort her and Jason had returned to the house and found them together and then just lost it. That's sort of what I was thinking had happened. But his family can vouch for him that he was definitely not there. I think on that night, though, it sounds like Kirra maybe was trying to get back at someone or do something, because she did bring up the 17-year-old neighbour. She did say that, I think her words were, "I was hooking up with a 17-year-old or performing oral sex," or something like that. And Tamika made the comment on the record as well that she went down to Jason, who was having a bong in the shed, "You better put your dog on a leash." That's what her words were. So,
did Tamika say whether he appeared particularly angry about that? Is there a chance that that could have set him off?
I do think that there was something said between the three of them that I think feuded this, and I don't know what that was, but it certainly must have been along those lines. Maybe you could assume that Kirra was trying to leave the relationship and maybe she was trying to get back at him or say something to anger him. I don't know why, but maybe that's the case. Maybe that has angered him. Maybe that has, and that could have set him off for sure. But if you listen to Nakota, the brother, and Katie, he would just lose it and just go off. It doesn't have to be anything massive, but if he did lose it, he really lost it. And it's just one of those cases that it does appear the writing is on the wall. Like, it does appear that he's done something to her and she's met with foul play. Those kind of injuries, how do you explain that? It's hard to explain. Why do you not call the ambulance as soon as you notice something? She had defecated and urinated while she was in the semi-unconscious state, picked her up and showered her to clean her up. And then he called Nakota at about 8 a.m. the next day to say, "What do I do?" And he said, "Mate, call an effing ambulance. I'm not a doctor." And he didn't. He waited till about 2 p.m. So you put those dots together and you sort of think, well, she's obviously met with foul play, but it mustn't be that clear because he hasn't been charged with anything. So,
was he formally interviewed by the police?
Yeah, I believe so, and so was Tamika. But that's the thing. What Tamika and everyone has told me on the podcast might be different to what they told police. They could lie through their teeth to the police, and there was no evidence, there's no CCTV or fingerprints or anything like that. Not that fingerprints would do anything because it only proves that they lived together, but there was no direct evidence apart from her injuries that would tie him to it. So I guess if he lied about it or Tamika lied about it, then it's kind of hard for them to prove beyond a reasonable doubt.
If you've got on the record that Tamika is saying that she had a physical fight with Kirra where she did hit her head, and it sounds quite serious, and then the next day Kirra has died of a brain injury, from someone who might not know the intricacies of the case, you would think that Tamika would be a clear suspect. Was she ever a suspect?
I don't know if she was ever labelled a suspect, but she was definitely interviewed and definitely gave a statement, and she was definitely on their radar. But I'm not a medical expert, but I don't think, it certainly could have contributed to it 100%, but I don't 100% know that that's the truth that what happened, because when I spoke to Jessie, Tamika's niece, she doesn't remember, and she was there, and she claims that she was sober, and she doesn't remember Tamika hitting her with a closed fist. She remembers her pushing her a few times, but she definitely does not remember Tamika punching her with a closed fist up to 4 times. So I don't know whether Tamika's been told that by Jason. That's certainly a theory that's been thrown around, that, Tamika's been told that while she was drunk and intoxicated, that you had a fight with Kirra, you punched her, you did this, you did that. That's what I mean with this case. You got one person saying I did this, but then you got a person who's sober and doesn't have much to do with the family anymore saying that, no, I was there and that didn't happen. So it's really hard to know what's the truth here.
And what's Tamika's relationship with her brother like now?
She says it's non-existent. She cut ties with him. And, I tend to believe her on that because she did meet us and she did provide us a lot of information. She gave us documents and, she came on the record, despite what you think of her and what other people might think of her, to come on the record and put all that out there and for hundreds of thousands of people to hear, it's pretty ballsy. So I tend to believe her when she says that she doesn't have anything to do with him and doesn't want anything to do with him. It's really hard because she's sort of not responding to me anymore. So I don't know where she stands with it.
On the podcast, did she have a theory about what happened to Kirra? As someone who knew her brother as well as she did and knew the dynamic of their relationship, does she have a theory about what caused Kirra's death?
Yes, she does, because she was told by someone he told. I don't know how much you can play on the air here, but what happened was Tamika became friends with Jason's next girlfriend after Kirra. I called her Sally. That's not her real name. She lives interstate. But Jason and Sally hooked up over Facebook and they had a very bad relationship and allegedly that's why he's in prison now for stuff that happened to her. She refused to speak to me on the record, but she did give me text messages and was happy for me to read them out. She told me and she told Tamika, this is not your crime. He broke down and confessed to me what happened one day. And this is what he said happened. And allegedly, he repeatedly smashed her head against the bathroom floor.
And with that kind of, I suppose it's not clear evidence because it's via sort of a secondary source, but is that enough for the police to sort of look more closely? Because clearly this wasn't an accident. This is someone who's died as a result of foul play, and there's now been a coronial inquest opened, hasn't there?
Yeah, they're yet to announce a date, but yes, they have said that they would be doing a coronial inquest into it. So I would assume that would ruffle some feathers and shake the trees a bit because, yeah, I agree. It is secondary. But when you put all those links together, it certainly strengthens a case. And I believe Sally has told the police that. But again, I think it comes down to he says, she says, you know, that old saying, if they're the only two present and he denies it, but she says it happens. But yeah, I read that out on the podcast, actually. I debated whether I should or shouldn't, but I did because it is important. And well, that's what Tamika's theory was. She tends to believe that that's what's happened, that he's become enraged about something and just lost it and just started smashing her head.
And what does Kirra's mother, Alison, think happened? You spoke to her extensively for the podcast and she's been really involved and supportive of the work because it's put Kirra back in the public's mind. Does she have a theory about what happened?
Yeah, pretty much along those lines. She believes while they were alone together, he's become angry or enraged and he's beaten her to death, probably in the way that Sally describes. She has no doubt that that's what happened because she's seen behaviour from him. Kirra and her were quite close, but Kirra did keep this from her. And she looks back and she reflects on a few things that happened and a few little mannerisms and words that Kirra said, and she now puts it together in hindsight and thinks, yeah, she was trying to protect me from him because he did threaten Alison and he did threaten the family. You know, that's the kind of guy he was. And she regrets it to this day, you know, not talking more, but there was those little cues or little words and you know, things that were said and done that maybe were more serious than came across to be. But she believes that wholeheartedly she died as a result of Jason.
I want to follow up on Kirra's 4 kids. Where were they on that afternoon and night when there were allegedly people over at her house? Where were they?
Well, thank God that they were not home. They were with Kirra's ex-husband and Alison at the same time because Alison didn't live in Queensland. She actually lived in New South Wales, and she came up because what she'd seen and heard from the ex-husband and from Kirra, she, as well as the ex-husband, were concerned about the kids being in the house with Jason. And so Alison, and she still talks about it this day, she sort of blames herself in a way, but her and the ex-husband were trying to get the kids back, and they actually wrote to a solicitor who then contacted Kirra to say, look, while Jason's in the house, we're not giving the kids back because we don't believe he's safe. And Alison sort of blames herself for that. So Alison was with the ex-husband, with all 4 kids, while this, you know, terrible night was occurring.
Do we know who is looking after the kids now?
Yeah, it's Kirra's ex-husband, who I haven't mentioned his name throughout the podcast because he's politely asked me not to and he's refused to comment, and he's made it pretty well known to Alison that he doesn't want anything to do with it. He doesn't want the kids' names mentioned, you know, and that's why you don't hear much of Kirra's story before she met up with Jason. Basically, my story starts 9 months before she died because I couldn't really go into their relationship. You know, he didn't really want any part of it. So,
finally, I want to know if with the information that you've compiled and you've found by speaking to neighbours and friends and family members, and now this coronial inquest opening, do you think that it's possible that Kirra's family will see justice for what happened to her?
You know what? I actually do. And when I first finished the series, I didn't know what to think because I wanted to make that phone call to Alison to say, look, guess what? He's been charged. Or look, guess what? This has happened. But I couldn't do that, unfortunately. But, you know, with what's being presented and with the future coronial inquest about to happen, will happen one day, I am confident that once they hear all this evidence, you know, because Nakota, the brother, was never interviewed. A few other people were never interviewed. I'm really hoping that when they get in there and, you know, if they speak truthfully, then, yeah, I am confident we can get to the bottom of this. Yeah, I am.
In 2021, a coronial inquest found that Kirra-Lea died from swelling of the brain caused by an obstruction of air or blood.
Deputy State Coroner Jane Bentley found that her de facto partner Paul McDonald, who Jamie called Jason at the time of his podcast for legal reasons, was likely drunk and became enraged when she told him she was leaving.
Her findings went into shocking detail of his 70-plus domestic violence convictions, including that he'd choked, bashed and threatened multiple women, telling one of his victims he'd got away with murder. She wrote that McDonald likely struck Kirra-Lea's head with a baseball bat, hit her head on the floor, and possibly pushed her head into the toilet wall of the house they shared. It is highly probable he choked her, she added. While there had been claims that Kirra-Lea's injuries were caused by a drug overdose, unrelated fight, or by striking her head on a shower wall, the coroner said they were all theories inconsistent with the medical evidence. Following the inquest, the Queensland Police Homicide Investigation Unit established an investigation centre in Gympie, and in July 2022, Paul McDonald was charged with murder. He faced a committal hearing in April 2024. His case is still before the courts. Thanks so much for listening to this special series of True Crime Conversations, which was hosted by me, Gemma, with audio design by Scott Stronach. Our executive producer is Moylan. Mamamia has partnered with the charity Rise Up Australia. Their mission is to deliver life-changing and practical support to families experiencing domestic and family violence. If you'd like to support them, you'll find a link in our show notes. And if this episode has brought up anything for you, or you just feel like you need to speak to someone, please call 1-800-RESPECT on 1-800-737-732. I'll be back next week. See you then.